But first, as we sit here tonight, the world is still coming to terms with the true scale and devastation of multiple earthquakes which struck Turkey this week. Every few hours, the death toll increases by thousands as rubble is cleared and more human tragedy is discovered. And these are some of the scenes the Turkish people are living through.
Relatives look on, sick with worry. And a bubbling anger growing inside.
We have no electricity, we have no any additional machines to supply our machines. We have no support yet from the government. We have...
Now 40 hours, no one comes to touch this.
Nobody
are here to touch this. Understand? From the 40 hours. I am the one waiting here for 40 hours. No one came and arrive here to touch.
Now we are dying here,
No
dying, okay, just dying.
They stand in huddles weeping and find comfort by talking to the trapped children they may never see again.
After the first earthquake struck on Monday, criticism began pouring in on social media against President Erdogan for not having adequate structures in place to deal with natural disasters and for failing to respond with enough speed. And do you know what this weak, narcissistic president did in response? He blocked access to Twitter so all of those people using the service to document this tragedy and stay in touch with loved ones could not get information out of the country easily. He described the videos and criticisms as disinformation. Now, there are few things more evil than shutting down a major communication platform at a time when many families do not know whether their relatives are dead. The ban lasted more than 24 hours at a critical time during the disaster recovery, and Erdogan only backed down after meeting the Twitter leadership. Express newspaper in the UK reported that Erdogan thanked Twitter for its cooperation and pledged to support Turkey's efforts to combat disinformation. Yet another example of a government wielding this idea of disinformation as a weapon to curb criticism. It should be a notion which disturbs every journalist on this planet. But I have been disappointed to see that this issue has not gained as much traction in the media as I think it deserves. Yes, there is a highly complex story that needs to be covered in the earthquake aftermath itself. But with Western leaders pouring money into this region and legitimate fears being raised about how Erdogan will spend these funds, we must scrutinise his actions closely. Now let's bring in tonight's panel, and I'm pleased to say I'm joined by Menzies Research Centre's Nick Cater and host of the Royal Report right here on Sky News, Caroline De Russo. Caroline, this act of censoring information going on Twitter because of the criticisms, it's disturbing, isn't it?
Correct. And the thing is, well, it's not disturbing, it's actually totally terrifying. And if you have a look, it's like China has sent Turkey a masterclass video about hiding what's going on the ground. And at a time like this, particularly when a disaster has just happened, which we saw not that long ago happen in Lebanon, for example, there are a lot of Turks who are living elsewhere in the world. There's a lot in Europe, there's a lot here in Australia. They're obviously worried about what's going on the ground. For the government to just simply go, well, this is inconvenient and therefore it's disinformation, I mean, that there is something which, you know, coming from a liberal democracy, we should absolutely abhor because it's revolting. But at the same time, we start to see our government similarly use those sorts of terms simply for information that is politically inconvenient for them, where it may or may not necessarily have an accuracy issue.
Yeah, Nick, the language, disinformation, it's something that gets attached to these topics, which becomes something which is unpleasant for particular politicians. They just label it away as disinformation. What's your take on this issue?
Yeah, I think you're right, Jack. There was a particular evil in this case, and that is the fact that you can imagine under those circumstances that Twitter becomes a vital channel for letting people know you're alive or finding out about relatives and indeed helping the rescue operation. So that is particularly nasty. But I wish I could say that this was just confined to sort of less perfect democracies with leaders with autocratic tendencies. It's not, is it? I mean, we have documented instances of Twitter collaborating with the US authorities, with the Democratic Party in order to shut down all that stuff about Hunter Biden's laptop, which I guess we might be talking about later, and also, you know, quite legitimate alternative approaches to managing COVID. Of course, people like Dr. Jay Bhattacharya was shut down out of Twitter at the instigation of US authorities. So unfortunately, this is now rife. And if you do it in one jurisdiction, then a less responsible jurisdiction too is going to take it to the next level, and I think that's what we're
Definitely, Caroline. Nick's right. It's out of this PR playbook where you've got someone who is essentially a dictator by everything but name. From every other metric, that's what this bloke is. And he's using this exact same playbook that Western leaders are using to stifle debates on COVID-19 lockdowns, this phrase disinformation.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is then they go, oh, well, the West does it. And so then what do we say? Then how do we
do it as well?
How do we criticise it when so many of the governments in the West are guilty of doing exactly the same thing? Because then we become hypocrites.
Yep, and a particular lack of outrage from journalists.
Yeah,
it's no surprise.